America's Navy is a military force that was born in desperation and fishing boats. Let me take you back to September 1775 in Boston. The city is under siege. 15,000 militiamen surround it, digging trenches on the ridges and narrow causeways. From land, the redcoats are caged. But from the water, ships can come and go almost casually, sails catching the wind, holds filled with food and rum, powder, uniforms, slipping right past the Patriot lines. This is the scene George Washington inherits when he arrives as Commander-in-Chief in July. From his Cambridge headquarters, he can see the evidence with his own eyes. The Royal Navy is feeding Boston through the sea while his army starves on land. He writes bitterly to Congress that the situation is mortifying, adding, "The strength of the enemy lies upon the water. Without a navy, we can do nothing definitive, and with one, everything honorable and glorious." Here's the problem. Washington doesn't have a navy. No shipyards, no budget. His treasury is a ledger full of debts, not resources. To challenge the Royal Navy outright seems like just madness. But perhaps madness is what these Americans have, or at least one. He's in Marblehead, Massachusetts, and his name is John Glover. He's not a soldier in the way most New Englanders understood the term. He was a merchant, a ship owner, a man who had commanded fishing schooners and coastal traders. More importantly, he was the colonel of a regiment unlike any other. His Marblehead men were not farmers with muskets. They were fishermen. They were sailors. They were captains. They had grown up in fog-choked harbors, threading the narrow channels and living by the rhythm of the tide. One contemporary described them as seamen to the last man, and Glover himself was known for discipline as much as daring. Washington met them, and he recognized instantly what he was looking at: the perfect team for a bold, new kind of plan: intercepting Britain's supply line. Now, Washington's logic, it was clinical, realistic. A continental fleet of ships of the line, that was impossible. But small, swift schooners, those were everywhere along the New England coast. The strategy was not to meet the Royal Navy broadside to broadside, that would be suicide, but instead to cut its arteries, capture the transports, take the cargo, starve the garrison. Every barrel of powder intercepted was one less barrel that was going to be fired at Patriot soldiers. Now, Washington himself wrote out the instructions. They said, "You are to proceed as commander of the schooner Hannah on a cruise against such vessels as may be found on the coast of America, bound inward and outward to or from Boston. You are carefully to avoid coming to action with any ships of war." It was cautious, but also revolutionary. The first ship chosen for the experiment was not a warship at all. She was a modest fishing schooner owned by Glover that had been christened Hannah. Placed under the command of Captain Nicholas Broughton, she slipped out of Beverly Harbor in early September under Continental pay. At that moment, without fanfare, without even a proper flag, Washington had kind of officially chartered and funded the first vessel at sea. It was not yet the Continental Navy authorized by Congress, but it was the beginning of a fleet in continental service. A quiet, but nonetheless momentous step. And the heartbeat of a navy began with a fishing boat and a debate over bragging rights. If you ask the people of Beverly, Massachusetts, they will swear that because the Hannah sailed from their harbor, they are the birthplace of the American Navy. Now, go to Marblehead and ask the people there, you're going to get a very fierce rebuttal. It was their boat, their men, their commander. The truth is, Beverly provided the harbor, Marblehead provided the crew and leadership. Both towns midwife the fleet, though neither has been eager to share the glory. Now, no fleet sails without a banner, and in the early days, Washington's schooners sometimes carried one both stark and striking. It was a white field, a green pine tree, and the words, "An appeal to heaven." The motto was drawn from philosopher John Locke, who wrote that when earthly kings deny justice, men may appeal to heaven for judgment. For New Englanders, already steeped in resistance culture, it was a battle cry. As one Marblehead sailor recalled years later, that flag was more than cloth. It was a declaration. Though not every schooner can be proven to have flown it, the pine tree flag became indelibly linked with Washington's improvised fleet. It was a symbol as much as a weapon. Hannah was only the first, and within weeks, more schooners were enlisted. The Lynch under Captain John Ayres, the Lee under Captain Daniel Waters, the Franklin under Captain Samuel Tucker, Hancock under Captain John Manley, and the Warren under Captain William Burke. Now, these were not ships of the line. They were not bristling with heavy cannon. They were just shallow draft raiders, crewed by fishermen turned sailors who knew every tide and every inlet along the New England coast. Against unescorted merchants, they were lethal. As the naval documents of the American Revolution later recorded, the very presence of these schooners forced His Majesty's transports to sail under guard or not at all. While Washington experimented with his ad hoc fleet, the Continental Congress wrestled with a larger question. Should the colonies formally authorize a navy? Now, some delegates were terrified. A navy would be definitely outright treason, an open admission that reconciliation with Britain was dead. But others argued it was simple necessity. The debate was tense, the stakes immense. And finally, resolved that a swift sailing vessel to carry 10 carriage guns and a proportionable number of swivels with 80 men be fitted with all possible dispatch for a cruise of 3 months. That resolution of October 13, 1775, is celebrated as the official birthday of the United States Navy. In the weeks that followed, Congress gave the fleet structure. Committees were appointed to oversee shipbuilding and procurement. Colonies were urged to establish prize courts to make captures legal and prevent piracy. In December, Rhode Island's Essex Hopkins would be appointed Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Navy. Another resolution spelled out the rules of engagement. It said, "All vessels of war and all armed vessels belonging to the inhabitants of these colonies are permitted to attack, take, and seize all ships and other vessels belonging to the inhabitants of Great Britain." The verdict was clear. America now had an official navy, sanctioned by Congress and armed with law. The paperwork was done. Now, Washington's fleet was official, but still very small, fragile, and untested. The real question was still out there. Could these fishermen turned pirates survive their baptism by fire against the Royal Navy? That answer would come soon, in a shoaly cove off Beverly, where Washington's schooners would taste their first naval blood. I'll have that story in part 2 of The Birth of the Navy, Baptism by Fire. If you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe below so you make sure you don't miss it.